TV. Now, we're talking this week with Representative Keith Ellison. He's the first Muslim American ever elected to the United States Congress. He hails from Minnesota, and we're going to be talking about, though, his growing up years, his formative years, his school years, when he was living in Detroit, Michigan, and his move and conversion to Islam. All that in this next segment. Let's shift, if we can, Congressman, and go back to your childhood, which you write a lot about in the book. And you and I grew up in a similar time, and we were two young men of color raised by very careful middle to upper middle class families in two very racially unstable American cities, Detroit, and I grew up in Boston. And coming of age a few years after the Civil Rights Act, I sense your parents and mine were ever mindful of reputation and making sure we respected others and towed the line. Indeed, I remember that story quite fondly of your mother marching across the street to confront a neighbor who was saying some very nasty rumors about the Ellison boys. That's something my mother probably would have done as well. Talk a little bit about what that was like to see, and what was your reaction?
Yeah, well, this was when Detroit was becoming a more integrated city. The neighborhood we moved into was primarily a white city, and we moved into that city, and me and my brothers, there are five of us, I had four brothers, were new, and a neighbor was, was saying, well, there were some, you better be careful, there's been robberies, we think it's these bunch of black boys who live over here. And my mother heard about that and got offended and went over to introduce us to this man, marched us over. We didn't know where we were going or why, but my mother knocked on the door, answered the door, and said, these are my boys. They're not doing anything wrong in this neighborhood. They're all little kids, as you can see, and you have no reason to fear them. And, when I look back on my mom, what a courageous woman she is. She's always been our best advocate, sticking up for us. I really count myself lucky as having a wonderful childhood, because I had a mother and a father who just insisted that, we get the chances that other kids had. And so it showed me, something about standing up for yourself, not backing down, and doing what was right. So it's really a fond memory of my mom.
And you also, the lessons that were taught to you are very similar. I remember reading the story about your grandfather's eyeglasses and discovering the hard way of his inability to read and being told not to disrespect him. Similar experience with my own grandfather. I would say, just read it, Papu. And were we perhaps too sheltered and unaware as children, or what do you think caused that?
I think that when you're a child, you just tend to think that the way things are for you are the way things are for all. And I had no appreciation, having grown up in Detroit, not rural Georgia like he did, that for so many African Americans, the chance to be educated was just denied them. Just couldn't have it. And it never occurred to me that someone in my family couldn't read, because my grandfather was very smart and could do figures in his head. And he would amaze us with the numbers he could add, subtract, and divide, all without any paper.
You converted at age 19 from Roman Catholicism to Islam. And you write in the book about Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali as inspirational figures. I have to ask, though, what really led to your decision to pursue the religion of Islam?
Well, this is a good question, Dennis, because at the end of the day, I wonder if anyone can put their finger precisely on why they would make a major life-changing decision, like go from one faith tradition to another one. I think people would be hard-pressed to answer the question, why do you want to marry this person, or anything like that. So I have to confess, I'm not quite up to the challenge. All I can tell you is that I was at a point in my life when social justice was very important to me. Spiritual connection was also very important to me. The activity that I was involved in on campus, really was a very, it didn't have spiritual dimensions that I kind of wanted and needed. And so when I was introduced to Islam, it met that need in me at that time, and it sustained me since. And since that time, I'm glad that I've learned a lot more about Catholicism and other faith traditions, and learned that they all have great beauty to offer all people if you're interested. And of course, there are secular traditions that are very helpful to the human spirit too. So, but at that time, I needed to fulfill a spiritual void that I was having, and Islam met the moment for me.
You know, it's interesting. It's almost like that scene from the film Rounders with Matt Damon, where he basically is about to tell his law professor he's leaving law school to go and become a professional poker player, of all things. And the professor confesses something to him about his talent. He says, you know, that when I was 12 or 13 years old, as a young Jewish boy, I could recite the Talmud backwards and forwards. I was considered a bit of a whiz at that age. And it clearly, Matt Damon, the character, says, so why did you leave? He says, because I never found God there. And you discuss your faith with such deep personal conviction. I mean, that description towards the end of the book of your Hajj, your pilgrimage, was deeply moving. Where does that come from? Was your decision somewhat based on perhaps not finding God in Catholicism and finding it somewhere else? I mean, I'm trying to get a little bit underneath the text
Right.
that you read.
I understand. Well, you know, I don't want to fault Catholicism, because I think, and I've learned that there is tremendous beauty in Catholicism. All I can tell you is that it had a lot to do with where I was at the time. At that time in my life, I conceived of Catholicism as a set of don'ts, set of rules, set of requirements. And who knows how I would have seen it given another experience. But at that time, that was what was in front of my eyes. And so that's the basis upon which I made a decision. And in Islam, and what I've also learned is that in Islam, there are fundamentalist types who can be extremely doctrinaire, ritualistic. And if I would have met them as opposed to the people that I actually met, maybe I would have made a different decision. But I count myself as fortunate and blessed because I met someone and I met a community that really emphasized the spiritual aspects of Islam and the meaning that underlies it, not simply the ritual. And so I count myself fortunate. You know, in life, so much of what we're attracted to or repelled from has to do with where we are at the moment and where and what that moment has to offer.
When we return on Bookview TV, we'll talk more with Representative Keith Ellison about his book, My Country 'Tis of Thee. We'll take a special look at all of the factors that went into his decision to run for the United States Congress and all of the pitfalls along the way. All that when Bookview continues. Stay right here.